Welcome to That's What I Call Marketing, the podcast where you'll hear from the leading lights in the marketing world and listen to their unique insights. Well, today kicks off our series of The Singles. Now, The Singles are shorter episodes where I'm going to speak to experts about hot topics in marketing and get their perspective. And not just their perspectives, because these episodes are being brought to you by Tracksuit. Tracksuit is, of course, the radically affordable, always-on brand tracking dashboard that will help you measure and communicate the value of your brand building activities. So we're going to be using Tracksuit data and data that the Tracksuit team have pulled together about these hot topics. And today we're going to be talking about things like Nike, Poppi, and Guinness, because of course we're celebrating St. Patrick's Day. Well, we were celebrating St. Patrick's Day. Now, if you don't know about Tracksuit, it was built by marketers for marketers. It helps bring brand building a prominent seat at the board table. Of course, the not so secret fact is that companies are paying over 100,000 euros. I've seen bills for bigger than this for brand tracking. So look, it makes it out of question for so many brands whose budgets, as we know, are under pressure. So Tracksuit have created their dashboard. Their data is easy to understand for both marketers and non-marketers and helps create a common language for companies to measure and communicate the value of brand in the boardroom. Now, you should go and check them out. Go to tracksuit.com and you'll be able to find out more. You'll get demos of their dashboard, and the team are standing by to show you how you can have a radically affordable, always-on brand tracking for your brand. So definitely check out tracksuit.com. And to talk all about the hot topics in marketing today, I am being joined by Dan Fleming and Jasper Skinner from Tracksuit. So let's get right into it. Dan, Jasper, thanks a million for joining me on That's What I Call Marketing, The Singles. Really excited to get into these hot marketing topics. But listen, before we do, let's just introduce you to everybody. And then I'd love to just hear a little bit from you guys on the growth of Tracksuit. So, hey, Dan, we'll start with you and you can introduce yourself to everyone.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much for having us on the show, Connor. So I'm Dan. I'm the UK country manager here at Tracksuit. I support our team leading our commercial and growth functions, currently covering the UK, but now also France, Germany, and Ireland, which is exciting.
Jasper.
So I look after our agency partnerships here at Tracksuit. Again, similarly, market-wise, that's across Europe, France, Germany, and Ireland, and essentially help building Tracksuit for our agency community.
Amazing. Tracksuit has been on an incredible growth journey. We're going to get into the hot topics that we picked to talk about, but I'd love you guys just to tell me a little bit about that growth.
I think you chatted to Connor a few years ago where we were operating out of ANZ, where we were founded, and we've been fortunate enough to just follow the growth essentially. So that's led us to setting up teams in the UK and the US, where we've just had a really exceptional response around how do we help marketers better measure top of funnel brand health. And that's allowed us to just continue to grow. So we work with close to 600 brands across the world now, tracking close to 7,000 brands as part of that, which has given us pretty cool coverage of like how do different categories operate in different markets. And as we'll get into it, seeing like phenomenal activity of like prebiotic soda with Poppi, how does the market look for like well-being drinks in the UK? And so having that global lens now allows us to just have deeper conversations with brands. So was once ANZ focused to now like quite a global view, which is cool.
Yeah. And Jasper, you said like you work with the agencies, not just brands, like agencies are getting in on the Tracksuit show as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, building on Dan's point as well, I think a lot of our growth trajectory can also be attributed to essentially one of our foundational principles, which was to be an affordable, accessible solution to brand tracking in market for consumer brands. And obviously, as we know, traditionally, that is an exercise that when undertook is quite expensive, is quite costly, and can be quite laborious. So I think the fact that we built the solution to be that go-to tool to help essentially become the common language between agencies, to your point, but also with brands, how can we help them scale in that regard, demonstrate the ROI of the investment in brand, I think can also be, as I said, attributed to the fact that, we've seen some pretty significant growth over the last 4 years.
Yeah, and I mentioned at the start, but like it's that affordable access that is such a game changer, right? It's because you either have brands who track once or twice a year or, do dips. or they just can't afford it at all, and they're trying to look at other things. So it's a brilliant kind of disruptor to the market. And obviously people go to gotracksuit.com. They can find out more. But listen, let's get into our hot topics. I wanted this one in. Obviously we've just celebrated St. Paddy's Day, and we had to look at some Irishness and Irish things. And the world goes green for St. Patrick's Day. I think landmarks like the Opera House in Sydney turns green, the river in Chicago turns green, and we've got, all of our politicians around the world handing out bowls of shamrock, and then the embarrassment of Conor McGregor. That one, I think. And talk about probably the most Irish of things. I've had Growing Your Wafer on the show, but Guinness is a phenomenal Irish brand, loved around the world. And then the Guinness 0.0 story is just phenomenal. I mean, you guys have some of the data there on kind of the growth of Guinness 0.0 in that non-alc category, particularly in the UK.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating, actually. I mean, I was listening to one of your prior episodes with Gary McLaughlin around the spirit side of things and about the advertising with that space. And it bore interesting thought for me, thinking about how that has somewhat shifted in the marketing sphere now for brands to be focusing on the non-alcoholic side of things and the alcohol-free side of things. And I mean, Guinness in particular is a brand that, I mean, as we know, steeped in heritage, essentially have always stayed true to the 4 Ps, and their advertising has been synonymous with how they've shown up in the marketplace. And I mean, I think from their 0.0 perspective, I mean, what we're seeing within our data is that their funnel metrics are on the rise, and that's alongside a growing category in of itself. Again, I think it's around 20% currently in the UK of adults don't drink at all. So it's a growing market, with that number differing between the home nations. And I think what we're starting to see, particularly again from their 0.0 advertising, is the fact that the power of the brand in Guinness is so strong. And again, that's thanks to years of investment and consistently investment in showing up and how they do through the work that they've done with AMV, BBDO for really quite some time now. And essentially what they managed to do is almost pivot while staying true to their brand principles, but pivot to this new product. And what we're seeing within our data is that they are very much category leaders.
And Conor, I was going to say, I love that an Australian and an Englishman are giving perspectives on St. Patrick's Day. But why not lean into it as an avid Guinness drinker? But I mean, just leaning on Jasper there, I think one of the interesting things that we've seen come through in the metrics is that Guinness just shoot the lights out for the preference around his great tasting. And so they absolutely have the salience of being the Guinness brand and can piggyback off that. But fundamentally, the product, the non-alc product is still just such a beautiful, high quality product to begin with.
Yeah.
And that's been really interesting to also see that drive preference. So seeing preference tick to around 37% within the category is pretty exceptional.
Yeah, and like that went up from like 29%. So like it's a significant, 29 to 37% is a decent jump in preference for Guinness 0.0.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I was going to say, kind of outside of from Guinness 0, what are some of the brands that you think that do St. Patrick's Day well? Because obviously Guinness is so steeped in Irish heritage, being born from there, they can lean on St. Patrick's Day quite well, as Jasper said, with the Make It a Day to Remember campaign that they ran a few years ago and whatnot. Are there any international brands that you think lean into St. Patrick's Day quite well?
Well, so I think like from an Irish perspective, probably like this has been an obvious one, but like the tourism board does a great job on Brand Ireland, right? I think, and they really lean into St. Patrick's Day, as I said, kind of all joking aside, like I think there was something like 40 politicians were all over the world using St. Patrick's Day as a way to engage with governments. And it's not just the US, like it's in Latin America, they're in the Nordics, everywhere. And I think that's just a phenomenal. So I think it's a combination of Tourism Ireland, Enterprise Ireland really managed to lean in incredibly well to the opportunity that we get with St. Patrick's Day. And I don't know, and someone will correct me, I'm sure, but I don't know if any other countries do it as well as we do around this national day. I mean, I think people have other opportunities, but we really have kind of built, I think a strong movement almost around St. Patrick's Day and that kind of feeling of Irishness that people seem to like for some reason. I don't know why. It's the Guinness.
Yeah. So good. No, yeah, just because I find that, to your point of like national days, it's interesting how do brands engage while keeping like the local is true and authentic, but actually having a tie back to do it well and not just do it for the gimmick of St. Patrick's Day. So
yeah, exactly. So it's a good one, and great to see Guinness doing so well, and they've big ambitions outside of these shores and into the US this year, and it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. I'd love to talk a bit about Nike, and I just think it's fascinating. I know there was stuff on the Tracksuit LinkedIn page maybe a week and a bit ago just about Nike maybe finding its way again, bringing brand back, and starting to see some shifts in their metrics as a result of it. And of course, they had that wonderful Super Bowl ad that felt classic Nike. So like it was just a proper Nike piece of advertising. So what have you guys seen in terms of Nike's maybe return to greatness?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first is just like the relief and the excitement of seeing that campaign where it just felt so Nike. I think that, the So Win campaign, Super Bowl campaign was so exceptional. It's pretty moving to when you see an ad like that just gets you so fired up, especially for someone who is like a very average, pathetic athlete. Nothing more do I want to like go and shoot a hoop after seeing Caitlin Clark or like run around a track, albeit very slowly. But I think it was epic. I was watching a piece from Elliot Hill, the new CEO, who was talking about like letting Nike get back to their roots, which is like sport, human performance, and or like just back to its ethos around just do it, as you were saying. And we've already seen some changes or things starting to turn around, albeit it'll be a long-term fix, but we've seen a 3% jump in consideration, which 3% might not sound a lot, but that is equates to roughly about 7.5 million people that are starting to drive back to Nike after what has been coined the flop era of John Donahue. So I think it's just starting to see that change back to emotion, back to its roots, which is pretty exciting.
And that's like that number of the increase in consideration. That's only since December, right? Like it's not even, we're not talking about a year. It's recent enough.
Yeah, completely. And it's, I think even just off the back of, we saw Elliot Hill getting appointed, there was a 6% jump in stock prices, and that like immediacy, even from a brand health perspective, has started to kick in. So within the last 3 months, we're starting to see funnel data to turn itself around. And that's also not neglecting that there's a huge hole that was left, because in 2024, we saw that preference had actually dropped 6% during April to September, which is 8 million people across the US.
Yeah. And just, I think, to build to that point around how we're starting to see those stats pivot coming into this year. I mean, from what we've gathered so far, alongside the increase in consideration, so as Dan mentioned, around that 7.3 mil people mark, what we're also seeing is a rise in preference. So that's equating to around 2.8 million people who are now starting to prefer the brand as well.
Yeah, and it is interesting. Like, it's great to have the percentage numbers, but then the actual numbers, because they're significant.
Yeah, I feel like this will just go on as like one of the greatest case studies of, it doesn't matter how large your brand is, that investment in long-term brand building just needs to remain consistent. Otherwise, you will see erosion in your funnel and obviously share price as well, commercials.
Yeah, and you're right. Actually, like it is a great brand. Nike was always the one in agencies where people were like, the reference was always Nike. And that, I think people were still referencing Nike, but the old work, So it's great to see them coming back and having, incredibly strong creative.
What was your take on it all, starting to see the shift with Elliot Hill appointed?
Yeah, well, for me, honestly, it was when I saw the Super Bowl ad. I was like, I kind of had that thank God moment as well. Like, oh my God, this is just wonderful to see Nike making Nike advertising, and something that is like, it stirs emotions, right? And just gets you kind of going. It's something I want to watch. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? So I'm happy to watch. I'll watch it again and again and again. Yeah. It stirs something in you, and it just felt epic, didn't it? Like, it just felt big, and that's
cool.
I think that at that point you mentioned just there, kind of around the emotional advertising piece, I think is really interesting, because it's certainly a bigger conversation currently within the marketing community, is around emotional advertising and almost sort of building that affinity and building those sort of connections with brands. And I know that's a conversation we're having at Tracksuit, which is just more broadly, what are we starting to see in terms of how do those brands that are adopting more of an emotional centric approach, how are we starting to see the long-term effect of how they're driving consumers through the funnel? So it's just, it's an interesting point, but completely agree.
Yeah.
And it feels like the ultimate case study as well, of like the importance of having C-suite leadership that really buys the brand building, and like the impact of, if you have, a leader that is not a, brand focused leader that's coming from a background, without throwing all the shade on John Donahue, it's consultant led, how that can impact approach and ultimately like the buy-in to getting to get brand investment, how important it is to have a leader that understands why brand building is, a commercial outcome, like business outcome driven decision.
Yeah, 100%. And our next story is a brilliant example of just that. And it was the big news on Monday the 17th, so on St. Paddy's Day, that Poppi was acquired by Pepsi for nearly 2 billion. And it's a brand that's kind of new category, but also like, it's new. It's only maybe 5 years old as a brand, and has now been bought by Pepsi, which is incredible. There's an organization that understands the role of brand, if ever there was one. But you guys have been looking at Poppi over the last 12 months. I'd love to hear what you've seen in terms of the metrics for that brand.
Yeah, I mean, so exactly to your point, I mean, we've been tracking them over the last year or so, just to sort of monitor their brand health, understand how that investment of brand is starting to perform against those core metrics, those fundamentals. And it's interesting. I mean, we certainly picked up on quite a significant increase in growth and consideration across the past 12 months. So their awareness from February last year increased from 19% to 29% to Jan this year. So whopping 10% increase in awareness over the past year. And their consideration itself grew by 5% over that same time period. So from 8 to 13%.
It's phenomenal. And it's, I say, a whole new category. I had to even look up prebiotic sodas to even understand what that meant. I'm used to like Yakult or something. To me, that's Anyway, I can't even say the word.
Prebiotic soda.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny though as well. I feel like it's a category that also just lends itself, as you'd expect, with like beverage back to taste, having also not had prebiotic soda. How do you differentiate? How do you just first lead with product? Yeah. And the interesting part to Poppi as well is that close competitor it had with Olipop, who had an acquisition offer, or it was in that space, but then ended up raising privately. So it seems to be quite a competitive category, but a pretty phenomenal outcome and a good nod for consumer brands that you can get big exits out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, it's just a whole interesting space. And you look at that, and obviously, a likes of a PepsiCo is looking at their portfolio, and they've done probably as much as they can in zero sugar space, right? They've got the zero. And I even know from talking to Mauro Porcini last year that like they were going to, once they did that rebrand, I guess, refresh of their brand, actually I felt they brought it back to the brilliant Michael J. Fox era. It kind of had that nostalgia for me, but I'm old. So I think he was saying that they're definitely looking at kind of Pepsi Max being the leading product. So they were very much understanding that that's like where consumers' heads are at. And now you've got, this space where, it's seen as healthier snacks, healthier beverages, and Pepsi are obviously going, right, this is something we can actually help accelerate. Do you think it'll do, because Poppi had some brilliant associations with innovation, do you think it's going to do anything to help Pepsi on their kind of perception as being an innovative brand and a brand that's, I think, maybe thinking about consumer health?
It's interesting. I mean, I certainly wondering if it's more indicative of their sort of strategic approach as a business to head more in that innovative direction. And certainly by obviously, as we've picked up, acquiring a brand, that had a 58% association with innovation versus 28% on Coca-Cola certainly might indicate to that move. It'll be interesting to see if post-acquisition Poppi can maintain that level of innovation and obviously be operating slightly differently, being part of the umbrella and part of that portfolio. But I think as well, the fact that we had through our data 55% of those people also associating Poppi with a brand as being on the way up as well.
Yeah.
So I think it also just shows perhaps just more of a broader, bigger strategic move from Coca-Cola, just to be, again, acquiring those brands that are currently top of mind, currently leading on these attributes that perhaps they're seeing themselves wanting to align closer with. So again, being on the way up and being more innovative.
Yeah. And as Matt was saying on his recent post on LinkedIn, well, it was only this week, but like that, it's a great moment for modern brands, challenger brands, and that they can, there's actually, there is a way to break through. And I think Poppi have probably done it in a really good way. In fact, they've used all the principles of marketing.
And then it's also like a positive sentiment to the market of seeing more scale ups being acquired, growing successfully. Like Wild, the natural deodorant brand in the UK, was just recently acquired by Unilever. It's just like really positive signals. And you do hope that the perception of innovation, disruption gets passed through to the acquirers, almost like a shared perception of like, hey, they've recognized a gap of how emerging brands are doing things differently, engaging on like being social first. And so I kind of like the optimist in me hopes that perception is shared through to the larger brands.
Yeah, and then how it kind of permeates maybe what they do and how they think. But again, I think, I was lucky enough to meet Mauro Porcini. When you've got leaders like that in the business, I think it just is incredible how like he's all about human-centric design thinking and that like, he's leadership, right? So you're kind of thinking that's maybe it is all part of the Pepsi way. We will find out. We will see how this one plays out. Our last one today was talk of Reddit and Threads, and they're on the up in the UK, which I was really interested in this one because Reddit's such a fascinating space, right? Tell me a bit about what you guys have seen on Reddit and Threads increases.
Yeah, I mean, it is an interesting one, especially with the decline of X. How has this created space for challenges? I mean, the hero metric that we're seeing so far with Reddit is their awareness growing 7 percentage points through to March 25, and then also seeing consideration jumping from 17% to 22% at the start of this year. And then equally Threads capitalizing on that as well, growing their awareness 11 percentage points to 47% aided awareness, and then consideration lifting from 10% to 14%. So I think this is just one of those great benefits of, firstly, Reddit was able to experience the boost of Google's algorithm trending its content in a more favored way, so it could capitalize on that. But then it's also seeing, what does the landscape look like? How are users moving away from an X, and where does that create space for a Reddit and Threads? I'm a Reddit guy over a Threads, but so not surprised on that the Reddit lift, I guess, from a sample size of 1. But yeah, pretty interesting space.
And what is interesting as well, if you look at the landscape of maybe ownership of, say, like you've got X and we've got Musk, you've got Threads, you got Zuckerberg. There seem, I don't know, but like there's probably a sense of the connection to the owner piece impacting those brands as well, and you just wonder how potentially that might impact Threads with the Zuckerberg brand.
I mean, I feel like those brands are synonymous with just founder-led brand.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't know, maybe I'm naive here, maybe Threads less so. Like in terms of like, do people draw the relationship still between Threads, Instagram, Meta, Zuckerberg, most likely. Whereas X, I just feel like you can't escape the noise that is, where is Musk going? And also just like directly relevant back to like which product is performing and which product is actually not serving like interest of users. And like, I think there's widely agreed that the quality of X from a product standpoint and user experience has just declined rapidly over the last few years.
Yes. It's one of those ones where when you go in, like the algorithm favors Musk. You see all of his tweets. Like, I don't need. I was like, no, I want to see less of this, and I see more. Like, you're fine.
Well, back to the glory days of Twitter. I was lucky to go to South by Southwest, and one of the social strategists from NASA was talking about how, firstly, they spend nothing on marketing, no paid. They were one of the first organizations to launch on Twitter, and they took a first person approach to like any of their rocket launches. Like, I'm heading off to the moon, because they need to fit it into 100 characters. But they were in the top 2 most followed Twitter accounts like for the first few years there. So look, I'm not going to take bold predictions, but maybe X needs to go NASA first to turn things around. But just wanted to reminisce on the glory days of what Twitter was back then when NASA was leading the charge.
It was, and they were glory days. Like, it was, again, a platform that just changed so much, didn't it? You know, and there's been there was a very funny thing that came out. This goes way back. But when Twitter came out, and then somebody as a parody said they were launching something called Flutter, and you could only have like 10 characters, and people actually were like, oh my God, like, that's amazing. Yeah. Like, all the strategists going wild. You're like, that's not real. It's not real, guys.
It was so good. It just creates a whole nother conversation where we could even explore the days of Vine. Those like 5-second videos were just criminally bad.
Well, listen, guys, thanks a million. Great to get through all of that, all those hot topics. What's brilliant about this is we're going to be able to keep on top of what's happening in marketing, and it's not just the three of us having a perspective. We've got the Tracksuit data to actually, use it and look at it and see, what the impact of brand actions are, those brands, which is really incredible. And again, if people want to find out about Tracksuit and what it can do for their brands, just go to gotracksuit.com, and I know the guys are there ready to do demos, show you what the dashboard is able to do, because it's phenomenal. And the other thing I will say is the access piece, I think, is really brilliant. So like when Tracksuit comes into your business, you're going to be able to give other people access to it, and it has this ability to create this shared language in the company about things that really matter. And it's not vanity metrics, it's actually really proper commercial metrics, that you're relating to your brand activity. So it definitely, you're democratizing it, but I then think actually in organizations it's democratizing access to brand health as the proper conversation for people to have at the C-suite, at the board, whatever you want, even in your teams. They're good conversations to have. So thanks a million, guys, for joining me today, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks with another episode of The Singles where we'll cover more of the hot topics in marketing.
Awesome.
Thanks, Connor.
Thanks a million. I hope you enjoyed that episode of The Singles. I said shorter episodes being brought to you by Tracksuit, and we're delighted to be partnering with Tracksuit on this series. You can go to gotracksuit.com and find out all about their platform and how you can get access to radically affordable, always on brand tracking for your brand. It's a phenomenal dashboard. They're democratizing brand health for consumer brands, and I'm really excited about what they are doing. We are going to be coming back with these Singles episodes every couple of weeks, so keep an eye out, and we're going to be finding out what are the hot topics and what is Tracksuit data telling us about them. So stay tuned. If you like today's episode, of course, please do share it with your friends and family. Well, maybe not your family, but your friends, your colleagues, and let us know what you think. Are there things you'd like to see us cover in The Singles? We'd love to hear from you. So you can find me on LinkedIn under That's What I Call Marketing, or my own name, Connor Byrne. So for this episode of The Singles, thanks from me, your host, Connor Byrne, and of course from all the crew at Tracksuit.